Hi, this is Mike at GameFromScratch, and welcome to another A Closer Look at Game Engine series. Today we're going to be taking a look at AppGameKit2. This is from the game creators, the company behind Dark Basic, and a number of other game development tools. Normally it retails for $99. It's 2D, 3D, cross-platform, meaning available on Mac and OS X, sorry Linux users. Able to create games for those platforms as well as Android, iOS, and even Blackberry. It is programmed primarily in a basic dialect. It's basically basic with a little bit of C++ mashup, but somewhat interesting. And also available as a C++ based library. So if the idea of using BASIC for anything is anathema to you, don't worry, there's a C++ option available as well. So in the Closer Look series, we basically do a quick dive into what a game engine offers. Give you a bit of an overview, a preview, you look at what tools are available, and a bit of a getting started guide. It's sort of meant to help you decide if this engine is right or not for you. We don't go into a whole lot of depth. I don't have a whole lot of experience with this particular product, so I am by no means a subject matter expert. If I make a mistake here, I do apologize, but I try to be as accurate as possible. So anyways, let's jump right in. As I said earlier, it's available for $99, but if you are watching this as I speak right now, which is July the 7th, 2015, it's currently available for purchase in the humble bundle right now for $12 for a whole bunch of other game tools. Plus, a lot of that is actually going to charity as well. It's also on Steam, pops up on sale every once in a while as well, but the full retail price is $99. That's not a subscription, that's just a one-time purchase cost. But if you act now, within about the next week, it is available in that humble bundle for effectively $12. It is, as you can see in front of you right here, the heart and soul of it is probably this guy right here, the AGK IDE. This is based off of the CodeBlocks open source C++ editor. It provides your basic editing functionality for AGK script. AGK script, as I mentioned earlier on, is a basic derived dialect. So basically, it's, pun not intended, it's basic, but as you can see from the code in front of you, with a C++ slant, the variable, arrays are handled a little bit differently. You could do C++ style comments, a few other things, but for the most part, it is a basic derived dialect. Again, BASIC turns you off. The underlying technology, the underlying implementation is actually done in C++, and it is available as a C++ library. So if you don't want anything to do with BASIC, you can jump right in and use it as a C++ library, like you would with, say, SFML or SDL. The BASIC side, though, it's a fairly simple language to learn if you're a complete beginner. The entire idea behind BASIC, in fact, the B in BASIC means beginner. It is aimed at beginners. Personally, I am not the biggest BASIC fan you will find. I think some of the design decisions BASIC is a 30 or 40-year-old language at this point, and it's starting to show. And some of the decisions they made aren't really to my taste, but it's not a horrible language, and with some of the tweaks that the game creators have made for AGK script, it's more palatable. It is a friendly introduction now, so if you are just starting out and are wondering, is AGK or AGK script, BASIC, whatever, is this appropriate for me? The answer is yes. It is a good starter language. If you are already learned, well, of course you have the C++ option, so you could go down that road, but it's not a terrible choice for you. Where I do kind of wonder is, as the complexity of your system scales up, is this design friendly to that? And we'll see a bit of why this might be a bit of a question as we go on. But what you see in front of you, once again, loop back, this is a CodeBlocks open source IDE editor modified for AGK script. And this is where you can do all of your editing. You can see a very simple script up in front of you. I'm not going to jump into the details of what exactly it do. It's commented, and for the most part, it's self-evident. But basically, this creates a spinning 3D cube. And you just kind of come in, type it, and run, and there is the result. It's very simple to learn, both the library and the underlying scripting language. And there is good, solid documentation. We'll see that in a few minutes. But this is a basic scripted or AGK script example running of a spinning cube. the library itself is capable of doing 2D and 3D. A lot of the 3D stuff is still a work in progress, however. They're adding functionality to it. So, for example, right now you can only load static meshes, which is to say 3D models can only be imported in OBJ format, and that means no animation support. So animated models is something that they're currently working on, and it's kind of a fundamental thing to support for a 3D engine. So the 3D level support isn't as far along as a lot of other engines are right now. Plus, there is no world editor type support for 3D development, at least yet. I don't know that there's ever even intended to be one. So you would probably do most of your world or level editing in a third-party tool like 3D Studios Max or Blender, etc. So this is your code example, and this is your IDE where you would work. The nice thing with the IDE, it's got most of the functionality you would expect in an editor. Most importantly, at least to me, here I'll do a set and then control space. As you see, there is IntelliSense type support, and if you select the thing and enter, you also get code hints, so you can see the parameters that a given function take. Unfortunately, there isn't context-sensitive help, so if I hit F1 on something, I get nothing. There is good documentation available, though. Again, we'll look at that shortly, but it's not directly integrated into the IDE. Now, on top of that, though, we do have some functionality, such as code folding. You see here, for collapsing down particular chunks of code. We have the ability to debug. The debugger was actually added somewhat recently in the development timeline, and there are certain functions definitely missing. However, you can quite easily do most of what you need. For example, let's set a breakpoint on this line, and we'll just go debug, toggle breakpoint, and you hit the debugger, it will load up, and it hits your breakpoint. You can step over or out of functions, and you can delete your breakpoint. And that's about it. But at the same time, over here, you got your variables section. You can evaluate methods. So let me just do a continue here. Continue. It'll hit the breakpoint the next time. You'll see this value updated right here. Some things are missing, obviously. Conditional breakpoints would be nice. So you could say, break execution if this value exceeds this amount. Or it would be nice to be able to just click a variable over here and say, watch, or some kind of this manual entry stuff is a little gross. So hopefully that's something that gets added soon. But for a proprietary language, it is nice to see this integrated debugging ability right in the IDE here. That's about it, other than, and unfortunately I can't show you this easily, but this is a very neat, handy part of AppGameKit, is this broadcast here. And what that allows you to do is send your AGK script to code out to the players. Basically, it's an executable you run on your iOS or Android, or I think Blackberry. I'm not positive on that one, but you run it on your mobile device, and this code will run on your device. You don't have to deploy it or anything like that. So it allows you to test actually on real devices with the click of a button. Now, there is a bit of a catch there. For Android, it's super easy. You just go to the App Store, download this AGK2 player, and if you're on the same network when you hit broadcast, it'll just send it out and run it, which is very cool. On the iOS side of things, the App Store is a lot more restrictive on what you're allowed to deploy there, so you actually have to build it on Xcode yourself and then deploy it with your own signing, etc. You only have to go through this process once, and the player will be installed on your device. But sadly, you can't just go to the App Store, download it, and run it. But that is 100% on Apple and nothing to do with AGK here. So that functionality is a completely separate thing, but that is a very handy way to be able to run your code on a number of devices without having to go through the whole build, sign, link, deploy cycle that you normally have with a mobile device. So that's a neat little feature there. So essentially, this is your editing environment. You can have multiple projects open at once. It would be nice to see, at least in the future, definitely a bit more debugging improvements. Integrated contextual help would be great, as would some refactoring tools. But for the most part, it gets you through. It works. It does what it needs. It's sufficiently fast. I've never had a stability issue. It hasn't crashed on me or anything like that. So that part's nice. There is the code highlighting, there is the text completion, there are the code hints. So the majority of what you need in a modern tool are available and are here. Now, if you're more of a C++ guy, they've got you covered there as well. But the process is a little bit different. And let me just show you that quickly. This is installed for me as a Steam app. So you have to go to your Steam application, like so. And the C++ is actually, the C++ and the samples are an additional download after you install. You can specify which directory you want to put it to. So I've installed it here as CPP. And let me just try and remember where is it. No, it's not. I'm going to remember very last. Ah, yes, it literally was the last option. So here are a number of templates to get you started. Now, what you're seeing here are the Windows-based install. If you install on a Macintosh PC, you're going to see Xcode projects, iOS and Mac OS based. So they're not available here. So there's no template underscore iPhone or template underscore Mac available because of the platform we're on. But if you do install that way, there is definitely something available. And these are templates to get you up and going with your C++ project. Of course, you don't need to use any of this. You could literally just use it as a library like you would SSFML or SDL and just run with it like that. But the template makes things fast and easy to get going. They're all configured to work out of this directory with this pathing structure. So if you make it in a different folder, which you probably will, you will have to define your includes and library paths in your IDE of choice. But if you're a C++ programmer, you should already be pretty familiar with doing that. But you can just start with the template very fast. So let me just show you. I'm going to use Visual Studio 2013 as my example. Just come down here and clone that directory right there. And we'll call it VS Demo. I'll just open that up, and we'll just fire up the template inside. And you get an idea of what's involved in the C++ side of things. So that's loaded up. The majority of your code is going to be in template.cpp. You could go through and rename it, obviously, but this is a very simple, pre-done app. We'll just go ahead and run it, and I'll show you what it does. And go. So there you go. You just created your very first AGK C++-based app using the template. And as you can see, there were also templates for Android, for the interpreter that runs on different clients that I was talking about earlier. And so you can see there's a pre-configured Ouya, Blackberry, Android, and Windows templates available to get you started with your core application. But your C++ code goes over here in your template.cpp. This is basically your main loop. No, actually, literally, there is your main event loop. And everything, it's a very flat API design. It's a lot like SDL at that level. It's almost like a C-style library. There's no OO at all. It's not an object-oriented library, period. Everything is pretty globally based. And then what you'll see in the code, actually, is everything is index-based. So you create a sprite, it returns a handle. The handle will be 1. You create another sprite, it's a 2, and a 3, and a 4. So you're actually, that's your resource that you're dealing with. And it's sort of a state-based thing. So you create a sprite, and then you toggle the settings, etc., etc. I could see how this could turn into a bit of a coding nightmare as you go forward. There is no real organization built into the code for you. So you should look at this, if you're using it from a C++ perspective, as a low-level framework. This is providing you with your graphics routines, your input routines, etc. Not as a code framework. You're still going to want to build your game library, your entities, etc. on top of it and handle the complexity yourself. There's nothing there really for you. It's basically this flat namespace of AGK and all of the functionality that it provides. We'll see that when we see the documentation in a second. But I'll show you a very quick example on actually loading a sprite. So you can see what I was just sort of talking about right there. So first I need to actually grab a sprite that we're going to use. I think I got GameFromScratch logo on the desktop. Yeah, so grab the logo here, logo 128. And this demo, I think it goes in the executable directory like so. And we're just going to want to go ahead and load that sprite. And load sprite. And that's kind of it. You can specify, there's kind of two ways of doing it. You can either specify an index like so. So you can say load sprite into sprite position 1, or you can just say load sprite like this, and it will actually return the index you want to use. So in this case, I'll go ahead with using 1. And that was logo 128 PNG, like that. So that will load a logo in the background. Plus, I hate their light blue, so let's just turn ahead. Let's change that to black. And run our code. And there is our sprite up and loaded. So like I said, it's sort of state driven. So the minute you added that sprite, the sprite is now going to be drawn. So if we want to modify that sprite a bit, you kind of do it after the fact. Or if you want to turn that sprite off, you can after you've loaded it, etc. So let's look at actually doing that. So let's scale that sprite down to half its size. So then it's just a matter of set sprite scale. And then you pass in the index of the sprite you want to modify. So that's going to take a little bit of getting used to. If you're used to other libraries, this index becomes very critical. And we'll have it in size. So, and now we've made our sprite even smaller. Now let's look very quickly at, say, a physics concept. Let's go back down to our game loop here. You can see this, our game loop, all it's really doing is printing out the current frame rate and then syncing. Syncing is basically the same as displaying the back buffer. This is your go ahead and render call. Everything is basically batched up, and then this call, this is the go. So this is your draw call, if you want to think about it that way. Now let's change this functionality just a small bit, and we're just going to do if a button is pressed or if the mouse is clicked. Now, one of the things that's going to be a little confusing, again, if you go through documentation on this, it's designed to be as cross-platform as possible. But that means also that a lot of the input calls and such are abstracted in that they treat... so get pointer pressed is the same as a single press on the screen or a left click. Get button pressed is the same as hitting a joystick button or hitting the space bar. If you actually want to pull a key, you're going to have to make some slightly more platform-specific code, etc. It's all documented in the documentation, which we will see in a second. But let's just look at the logic here for if, and then, again, everything is in that namespace. Get button pressed. And there's a lot of magic numbers here. So again, the documentation will tell you this, but we're going to check if button 1 is pressed. That's either the first button, probably A, on your gamepad, or it's the equivalent of the space bar being pressed. But that's one of those things you have to refer to the documentation to actually discover. And then, or get pointer pressed. So if they either hit the space bar, the joystick button, or click the screen, then what we are going to do is just go ahead and enable physics on our sprite. That's just a matter of get sprite. Oh, sorry, set sprite physics on. And then that magic index again, so it's sprite 1. And then see another one of these magic numbers. It's kind of gets irritating. I wish they would use enums in this case. That's probably the cross-platform nature of it. But if this was a straight C++ library, you would probably expect that to be an enum there, as opposed to a magic number that you have to look at the documentation to figure out what modes mean. But 2 means let's see. There's static, kinematic. Static, dynamic, kinematic, I believe, were the 3 options. Then AGK. So basically what we just said is make this a physics simulated object and set sprite physics. And then as you can see, there's here for all of the various properties you might want to set for the physics object. And we're going to set the restitution. Make this guy a little bit bouncy. So once again, you pass in that magic index. And then we'll pass in 0.8. Restitution is, for lack of a better expression, the physics bounciness of an object, a value from 0 to 1. 1 will basically bounce out as far as it came in, and anything less will slowly decay over time. So a 0 would bounce not at all. So we want to be pretty bouncy here, and I think that's it. So now we've just modified our code slightly. So what we've just added was we're now loading that sprite and scaling it in half for no particular reason. Then if you hit spacebar, the joystick button, or pointer press, so the left mouse click, or touch the screen, we then set the physics on and make it bouncy. So now we'll see what happens. And hit the spacebar. And there's gravity taking over because our object is now in the physics simulation. And boing. So you just saw we actually did a fair bit in very few lines of code. It is a very accessible engine. The coding level, quite handy. I don't like the magic number stuff. I really wish those were, for example, enums that you didn't have to go and go, okay, what does 1, 2? What does 1 mean? What does 2 mean? What does 3 mean? That's unfortunate, but it is well documented, and once you do get the gist of it, this working with an index and then modifying the value after the fact, the approach is very consistent, and generally you'll be able to guess what it is you need to do until you get to one of these magic numbers, and you're like, okay, I gotta look up the help. And again, we will see the help in shortly. But that is the C++ programming experience. It's very similar in a way to the in BASIC, but you will have native performance as opposed to running through an interpreter. Now, one thing I've not shown here, this is your coding experience for the most part, but there is magic being done behind the scenes here. This is the core.cpp, and basically this will be a platform-dependent implementation. So we use the Win32, the Visual Studio 2013 template, and this kind of just basically is providing an app. What's the Twitter word? Bootstrap for us. This is our Win main. Scroll down here, I will eventually actually find Win main. Where to go? Oh, there's your Win proc. And somewhere down here will actually be Win main, your entry point. On macOS, there it is. On macOS, you will have obviously their entry point. Android will have their entry point, etc. But this is your platform-specific code that's been provided for you. You don't have to use any of this. This is just setting up a window for you. If you have your existing code and you're just using AGK as a library, then you don't need to do any of this. You obviously need to, handle your app, call the beginning, the end, clean up, etc. But this is just providing you a simple window to start with that your app can be hosted in. And again, this particular file is platform specific and will be provided in each separate template for you. You can use AGK completely as a library and run all of this yourself, or integrate it into your own existing application. No problems at all. So that's basically the programming experience from a BASIC side and a C++ side. And we already saw a look at the IDE tooling that's provided, the IDE, the code editor for the BASIC style programming. There's one other tool included. Actually, there's a couple of the tools included, but only one of real consequence. And that is if you go into Tier 1. Now, Tier 1 is considered the scripting level interface, where Tier 2 is your native level interface to C++ stuff. So Tier 1, you come in here, and you go into Utilities. You've got this image joiner, which is for making sprite sheets, basically, and also has a very simple UI. So pick the directory, how big you want it to be, the padding in between, and then it'll pack them into a single image. And then you've got Placement Editor. Placement Editor is sort of a level editor light. And I will show you this quickly. First off, you dump the image files you want to have available into this media directory. You can see I've got a number of tiles that I've dropped into here. Let's head on back. And then you can use Placement Editor as kind of a simple 2D level editor. So come in, pick a tile, drag, and place. Like so, and you can have them arbitrarily dragged in. You can organize them this way. Of course, you're generally going to want to snap. Let's turn snapping on. So then you just kind of come in and snap it like that. You can hit the paintbrush on and then paint with the previous selected item. Unfortunately, there's no flood fill. That would have been nice. Very good, handy thing to have. But this is a way for quickly... All right, and the accuracy is a little off on the snapping, it appears. Quick 2D level placement tool. A level editor type thing. Now, if I come back in, I'll show you the... If I came in with this tile right here, you'll see when I drop it. Now you won't. All right, let's turn... Okay, it wasn't snapping. Oh, sorry, turn paintbrush off. My bad. When you bring these sticks in, you've also got the ability to rotate and mirror. And then, probably somewhat critically, let's just put this guy here. So you see the overlap here. You can send it up or down in the depth. I don't know why that's not actually going up or down in the depth, mind you. All right, you're supposed to be able to. Anyways, for layering things on top of and below each other. It's a quick and handy thing, and when you've got it, you can take the output and load it with pretty much a single line of code. But there's also a lot missing from this. The controls are a little wonky. It's got this virtual joystick for panning around. As you saw, it's not the smoothest experience you've ever seen, a little bit glitchy or buggy. You have to actually drop your media files into the folder for them to show up here. So if I wanted to add new tiles, I would actually have to exit and restart the application. I can't just click anywhere here. I actually have to use the scroll extents. So at the end of the day, if I'm completely and utterly honest, if you're going to be doing anything other than somewhat trivial backgrounds, you'll probably use a full-blown editor like Tiled. There is, however, a TMX. TMX is the file format that Tiled exports. There is a TMX importer available for AGK, so you can pretty much out of the box use Tiled as your editor. But for simple stuff, there is this placement editor. It's just not the greatest tool in the world, and it's missing some hugely glaring things, in my opinion. There's no ability to find physics bodies or collision boundaries, etc. It's pretty much the essentials in almost any 2D game. It's not there. That is quite literally a tool for placing and layering 2D graphics. But for, like, again, a simple game, creating the background, etc., it should be functional for you, and it integrates nicely. There is, like, pretty much one-line code import of the exported results from that. So that's the other piece of software that's included with this kit. But for the most part, it's all about the library itself and the IDE for coding in their scripting language, and the rest of the tool. Oh, and of course that application that will run on your mobile device for quick testing. But other than that, there's not a ton of tooling in here. What there is, however, is a whole lot of really nice demos to get you started. So while we're here in the directory, I will go ahead and show you. It's back to AppGameKit2. So project folders, this is something I downloaded as a separate download after you do your initial install. But here are the built-in demos, basically illustrating just about everything you would want to do. So you have code-based examples available for you for just about everything. Plus they've provided a couple of user-implemented examples and a couple complete simple games. So I'll just fire up one of the simple games as an example. I open recent, and that was this guy. So here is a project implemented for space game across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 code files. It shows you basically creating a complete game. You can see it running. It's loud, but it is a full learnable example. So pretty much almost all of the facets that you would need to learn, there are demos available for them. There is really good samples codes to work from. You're not going to be sitting back wondering, oh, how do I do this or how do I do that on very many topics. It is a well exampled project, and then we'll talk now about the documentation. Now, my one beef. Oh, sorry, two beefs. I guess they're kind of combined, though. There's no easy class reference. There's class reference available, but it's not like a Java doc or the nice one-to-one between methods and implementation that you're often experienced. In this case, well, I guess we'll go ahead and see it. So I really wish I could come in here and say, load image, hit F1, and have it load up. Unfortunately, number one, there's no local documentation at all. It's all online. So if you want to, you can take a look at all this stuff without buying it. It's completely available on their website. Let me just fire it up. Oh, which one was it? This? No, that's not it. That's the home site. Oh, well, we'll go straight to it this way. So this is the heart of their documentation, and as I said earlier, there actually is reference material. It's just not a one-to-one relationship. It's workable, and you will have to use it a lot because, as I saw earlier, there are those like magic number type things where you have to go and figure out what variable you have to do for things, and somewhat unintuitively, it's under this folder called commands. This is your general class reference, pretty much, broken into or by genre, or you can just come here and have it all. Basically, here is every single method available to HK. And here are, well, broken down by function. So say you wanted to come in and do something with sprites, the physics, oh yeah, we'll use that physics example. So set physics on of the sprite. As you can see, the documentation itself is very well written. It's a thorough, well documented library. You won't struggle at any point in time. And then if you come down here, if you look, you will see that that magic number is actually documented. So 1 is a static, 2 is a dynamic, 3 is a kinematic. Yeah, and the description of what those actually mean are probably in here. So it is a well-documented library. Everything is available. It's just, there's just that missing link. I really wish that that was there. If you look up the top here, you've got this option. So it's not going to do a heck of a lot in this case, but basic example or C++ style. Now the downside is, under basic, there was a user-submitted code sample that you could see for this particular example, but there wasn't a corresponding one for C++. And you'll see a bit of that, but you will also find, in all honesty, the mapping between basic calls and C++ calls, it's 100% intuitive. It's part of why the C++ interface is, they're not using enums. There is no object-oriented. It's because there is this direct relationship between the two. So you should very easily be able to look at, this call right here and go, okay, I could probably literally copy and paste, add a semicolon, and that is the C++ version as well. Throw the AGK namespace in there and you're set. And 99% of the code is the same way. So if you do only have a basic example, I don't think I would ever sweat it because the C++ maps pretty much one-to-one. Now, head on back to the root of the documentation as well. The language itself is very simple. It's a basic, and here are your the language, the reserved words of the basic dialect itself. As you can see, it's quite simple. There's part of it that I find, I guess we'll loop back. I'm not a huge fan of basic to start with, so I don't know how much of this is basic inherited or how much of this is AGK script. But there are some things that seem needlessly obtuse. Like there is this repeat keyword, which effectively exists as a do while with a guareteed one run. And that just seems superfluous to me. Like you're adding complexity in a beginner's language for a very edge case. Like there are just some decisions made that I don't necessarily like. Same with, I believe they've changed it so basic uses an index of 1. So arrays start at 1, etc. Whereas AGK then, I believe, switched them down to 0. I'm not 100% on that one, but I think it did. But you'll find now all your lengths. So something.length is an item of 7 items will return a 6, which is not intuitive to anybody anywhere ever in the world. It's small gripes. I'm not a huge basic fan. You may be, you may not be. You will find, however, if you come back here to your principles, there's a pretty good overview of the language, how the language works, pretty much what you need to learn it is all there. I didn't, as you can tell by from earlier comment, I didn't bother learning. I learned BASIC 20 years ago. I don't use it that often. I've used a little bit of Visual Basic probably a decade back. Product of not being a huge fan of the actual syntax is I don't gravitate towards basic-based language. But the entire idea behind BASIC was to be accessible and beginner-friendly. So you can jump in with very little prior knowledge and just make things work. And then if you do have trouble, there is this reference, and then there is this language overview. And between those two, you will be set and running. If you're completely new to programming, is this enough to get you started? Maybe. It's not really... Yeah, you know what, probably. I think you actually could go from pretty much nothing to start programming using this and the samples. So as a complete beginner, I do believe there is enough here to get you going. But this is the source of all help. Come over here to the appgamekit.com/documentation. And again, your references here under commands, and the rest of it is pretty thorough. And then on top, you've also got guides. Guide's nice. It breaks down into specific task-based instructions. So things like dealing with text or dealing with platform deployment, etc. So this is a very, very, very well documented engine. That part is nothing but glowingly positive. I definitely recommend them on that level. In terms of scope, and we can come back here actually to the commands as a pretty good example. There is pretty much everything you would expect for a 2D game engine, including some things that are missing in a lot of other game engines, like video playback. It's pretty much everything you need to make a 2D game. Sprite sheets, physics, networking, sound, particle systems, music playback, input handling, motion controls, accessing the camera. Pretty much all of that stuff is in there. Scene graph management, complex game stuff, that's kind of lacking. You're going to probably be building your own management structure over top of everything. But all of the core fundamentals that you need, the building blocks that you need to make a game, they're all there for sure. And when you get into 3D, 3D is pretty good-ish. It's an area of active development for them. So as I said when we started off, there are things missing. There's no animated 3D model support yet. I think physics is still being added, etc. So so 3D is definitely an area that is coming along. But as a library, as an accessible library, you can get it, from a complete beginner to having a 3D object up on screen in a few minutes, and that's impressive. I think I go on record to say that everything you need, for the most part, for 95% of 2D games is in there out of the box, and the documentation is solid. The approach is consistent. You may or may not like it, but it is definitely, the entire API is implemented in a very consistent manner, which is definitely useful for just picking it up or for new beginners. So from a code perspective, that's what you got. The last thing I think of importance there is probably the community, and this is another area that's quite solid. Let's go to... that's the wrong thing. Oh, because I did it. APK. The forum, here we go, is quite active. So as you'll see, there are over 5,000 topics, 60,000 posts in their product chat area. And then the rest is broken down. Obviously, they've got support for their previous products as well. But AGK is definitely their most prominent product right now, where the priority and focus is. But the community does seem to be quite active. I did find, if I had a question and I did Google it, I did find an answer 9 times out of 10 on these forums. So the community does seem to be active enough. You'll see July, so today, yesterday, day before. So there is a reasonable expectation that if you have a question, it can be answered, which is often important with these kind of products. So that part's definitely nice. So essentially that is it. That is AGK2. So essentially it is a user-accessible, very friendly to beginners, comprehensive 2D game engine for sure, 3D game engine on the way maybe with some tools missing, but it's mostly a 2D game engine right now. There is everything you need to get started, which I've always thought was essential, especially for a new person, so they don't have to go out and configure their text editor, etc. You just download it and start writing code, and that part's nice. There's hundreds of examples in there, which are good. It's well documented, which is also good. So if you are a beginner looking for a project to start with, especially if you like the idea of using a basic derived language, AGK, I think, is a good choice for you. It does provide what you need. What is there is definitely the majority of what you will require for quite a while. And there are enough samples there that you can, through cut and paste coding even, get where you need to be. The layout of BASIC itself and the program structure and the way things are designed, it's a very nice, approachable way. You won't have to deal with the complexities of a linker, project hierarchy organization, and that kind of stuff. And the way that their code itself works is very newbie friendly. Now, I don't know how well this will actually grow towards a larger project. This approach also leads to spaghetti code from hell. You would have to do a layer on top to keep things organized as your project got more complex. Now, the other potential market for AGK would be for C++ developers that are looking for a cross-platform media library. Basically, you don't want SFML or you don't want SDL. AGK really is another option. Now, it really does come down to, do you like the way they've done their code or not? And I can't answer that for you, but it is definitely an option in that space. So it's kind of a product for two people. It's either for the beginners that are looking for An approachable 2D, somewhat 3D engine that's code focused and not using visual tools like so many other engines offer, or it's a cross-platform C++ library for primarily 2D, a little bit of 3D development. So it definitely works in both regards. It's worth checking out, especially right now, as I say, with the Humble Bundle going on. It can be picked up for almost nothing. So if this did interest you, I suggest you move quickly while that bundle is still on. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. See you later.